Hi everyone, welcome back. We have a new story to share with you, so let's get started. My name is Andrew. When my girlfriend decided to leave me during what was honestly the worst time of my life, she had no idea how much things would change in just a year or two. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when things were actually good between us. Her name was Ruby, and when we first met, I genuinely thought I had found my person. You know that feeling when you meet someone and everything just clicks? That was us, at least at first. We met when a mutual friend introduced us at a get-together about 3 years before everything fell apart. I wasn't even planning on going that night because I'd had a long week at work, but my buddy practically dragged me out of my apartment, telling me I needed to socialize more. I'm glad he did, because that's where I saw Ruby for the first time. We started talking that night, and before I knew it, we were utterly absorbed in each other. We connected on every level that mattered to me. Intellectually, she could keep up with any conversation I threw her way. In the days that followed, we met a few times, and our conversations gradually became more personal. I was working a stable job at a marketing firm then, earning decent money that allowed me to live comfortably. I wasn't making six figures or anything extraordinary, but I was doing well for someone in their late 20s. I had a lovely apartment, a reliable car, savings, and enough left over each month to enjoy life without constantly worrying about my bank balance. I also made sure Ruby never wanted for anything as we grew closer, at least not anything I could provide. I'm not saying I spoiled her with designer handbags and expensive jewelry every week, but I made sure she felt appreciated and cared for. I took her to nice restaurants because I wanted her to feel special, and I enjoyed treating her to experiences she might not have splurged on herself otherwise. As we began dating, I surprised her with weekend getaways whenever I could. Sometimes it would be a spontaneous trip just to get out of the city and spend uninterrupted time together. Other times I'd plan something bigger, like when I surprised her with a trip to the coast for her birthday. I'd saved up quite a bit of my salary to make that happen, and the look on her face when I told her to pack a bag because we were leaving in an hour was worth every penny. I bought her thoughtful gifts, items that showed I paid attention to who she was and what she liked. I wasn't trying to buy her love or her affection. That's not what this was about at all. I just genuinely enjoyed making her happy, seeing her face light up when she realized I'd remembered something small she'd mentioned weeks earlier. She seemed happy too, or at least that's what I believed at the time. Looking back now with the benefit of hindsight, maybe there were signs I missed or chose to ignore, but in the moment, everything felt genuine. She'd tell me all the time how lucky she was to have me, and she'd say it looking sincere. And I'd feel this warmth spread through my chest, because hearing that from someone you love hits differently than hearing it from anyone else. She'd tell me how I was different from all the other guys she dated, which made it feel more real. Those words meant everything to me because I really cared deeply for her. I wasn't pretending or trying to be someone I wasn't. The way I treated her was just a natural reflection of how I felt about her. I was all in, wholly committed to this relationship in a way I hadn't been with anyone before. By the second year, I had already started seriously thinking about proposing to her within the next year or so. I'd imagined different proposal scenarios in my head, trying to figure out what would be meaningful and special without being over the top or cliché. I thought I knew who Ruby was as a person, what her values were, what she stood for. I believed the words she said to me about not caring about money, loving me for who I was, and being in this for the long haul were genuine and meaningful. I was still blissfully unaware of what was coming, still trusting the future we talked about building together, still thinking I had found my person and that we'd grow old together someday. Then everything changed, and it happened faster than I could have ever anticipated. The company I worked for went through what they called massive restructuring, which is basically corporate speak for we need to cut costs, and many people are about to lose their jobs. My entire department was let go on the same day. I'm talking about walking into the office on a Wednesday morning, attending what I thought was a regular team meeting, and then being called into HR one by one to be told that our positions were being eliminated, effective immediately. Just like that, I lost my job. There was no warning, no heads up, no time to mentally or financially prepare. They handed me a severance package that included 2 months of pay, which sounds okay until you realize that 2 months go by incredibly fast when you have rent, car payments, insurance, groceries, utilities, and all the other expenses that don't stop just because your income did. I walked out of that building with a box of my desk belongings, feeling completely numb, like I was in some kind of bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. I tried to stay positive at first, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to keep your head up and not let setbacks bring you down. I saw this as just a temporary situation, that I was good at what I did, and that I'd find something new quickly. I reassured Ruby the same way, sitting her down that evening and explaining what had happened. I told her not to worry, that I had some savings to hold us over, that I'd already started updating my resume and reaching out to contacts in my industry. She seemed understanding at first, hugging me and saying things like it'll be okay and something better will come along. We were on the same page in facing this challenge together as a team. I thought this might even bring us closer, you know? Like we'd look back on this time years later and talk about how we got through it together and came out stronger. But the job market was ruthless, and I wasn't prepared for just how difficult it would be. I started sending out applications the very next day, tailoring my resume and cover letter for each position and ensuring everything looked professional and polished. I reached out to former colleagues, asked for informational interviews, attended networking events, and did everything the career advice articles tell you to do. I applied to positions at my level, below my level, and in different but related fields. I wasn't being picky. I just needed work. But weeks went by, and I kept getting rejection emails, or worse, no response at all. I'd get excited when I landed an interview, spending hours preparing and researching the company, only to make it to the second or third round, and then get the "we've decided to go with another candidate" email. It was demoralizing in a way I'd never experienced before. Every rejection felt personal, even though I knew logically it wasn't. Weeks turned into months, and my savings began to dwindle rapidly, a development that genuinely scared me. I checked my bank account every morning and watched the number get smaller and smaller. I had bills piling up on my kitchen counter. The stress was eating me alive. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, doing mental math about how long I could survive on what I had left, what I could cut back on, what would happen if I didn't find something soon. The anxiety was constant. I felt like I was drowning, and no matter how hard I tried to swim, I couldn't reach the surface. I was doing everything I could to keep my head above water. I started taking freelance gigs through websites where you basically compete with hundreds of other people for small projects that pay way less than they should, which is nothing compared to what I used to make, but it was something. I did odd jobs too. I was working harder than I'd ever worked in my life, juggling multiple part-time jobs and freelance projects. But I was making a fraction of what I used to earn. Some weeks, I'd work 60 or 70 hours and still not make enough to cover all my expenses. The lifestyle I had before became completely unmanageable. I couldn't take Ruby out to fancy dinners anymore. Before, I would think nothing of making a reservation at that Italian place she loved. Now I was buying the cheapest groceries I could find and meal prepping to stretch my food budget. The spontaneous gifts I used to enjoy giving her completely stopped because I literally couldn't afford to spend money on anything that wasn't essential. The weekend trips we used to take became impossible. I was barely holding things together financially, working multiple part-time jobs that paid almost nothing, coming home exhausted every single night, and trying desperately to figure out how to get back on my feet. Throughout all of this, I kept reassuring Ruby that things would improve. Every time I saw her, I updated her on my job search, told her about upcoming interviews, and shared any positive developments, no matter how small. I would say things like, "I've got a really good feeling about this opportunity," or "My contact said they're definitely hiring soon," or "This is just temporary. I promise things will turn around." I was trying to stay positive for both of us to keep her from worrying, trying to show her that I was handling it and that she didn't need to lose faith in me or in us. But over time, Ruby stopped viewing it that way, and that's when the disrespect began to creep in. It was subtle at first. I initially questioned if I was being too sensitive or reading too much into things. She'd make small comments here and there that hurt, but I tried to brush them off because I didn't want to start arguments while I was already stressed about everything else. It was clear she was blaming me for everything, which somehow felt even worse. When the excuses started, that's when I really began to feel her pulling away. We had a routine that had been solid throughout our relationship. Ruby would come over to my place every weekend. Usually, she'd come Friday evening after work and stay through Sunday. It was our time together. During the week, we were both busy with work and life, but the weekends were ours. I looked forward to them all week long, especially during this tough period, because even though everything else in my life felt like it was falling apart, I still had her. Or at least I thought I did. But suddenly, out of nowhere, she started canceling on me. The first time, she texted me on Friday afternoon, saying she wasn't feeling well and was just going to stay home and rest. I was disappointed, but I understood. People get sick. It happens. I asked if I should check on her, and she said she'd be fine and that we'd see each other next weekend. The second time, it was a family obligation. Her cousin was hosting an event, and she needed to be there. Again, I understood. Family is important. The third time, she said her friends really needed her because one of them was going through a breakup and needed support. That's 3 weekends in a row, and I was starting to notice the pattern. But I didn't want to be that guy who gets upset about his girlfriend having her own life and other commitments. So I just said okay and tried not to show how much it bothered me. But then it kept happening. Every single weekend, there was a new excuse. She had to work on a project. She wasn't feeling up to it. She needed some alone time. Her mom needed help with something. Her car was making a weird noise, and she didn't want to drive. On and on. I could feel her slipping away from me, feel the distance growing between us, but I didn't want to believe what was becoming increasingly evident. I'd text her during the week with messages that used to get immediate responses. Before all of this, if I sent Ruby a message, she'd reply within minutes. We'd have long conversations throughout the day, sharing funny stuff we saw, talking about our plans, just staying connected. But now, I send her a message and wait hours before hearing back. Sometimes it would be an entire day before she responded. I see that she's been active on social media, posting stories and liking other people's posts, so I know she has her phone and is using it. She just isn't replying to me. When she finally responds, her messages are entirely different from how she used to text. They're short, just a few words, with no warmth or affection. No more heart emojis, miss you, or the sweet things she used to say. Just cold, minimal responses like okay, yeah, or busy RN. It feels like I'm texting a stranger, not the woman I had been with for 3 years at that point. I knew something was wrong. I could feel in my gut that her behavior toward me had changed, and I sensed it meant something bad, even if I couldn't prove it yet. But I kept making excuses for her in my mind because I loved her and didn't want to face the truth that was becoming increasingly obvious. I was in denial because accepting what was really happening meant admitting that the person I loved and trusted was abandoning me during my lowest point. The avoidance became impossible to ignore, and I knew she was lying to me. There was one specific weekend that made everything crystal clear. Ruby told me on Saturday morning that she had to work late that day, that her boss had dumped a bunch of urgent stuff on her, and she'd probably be at the office until late at night. She added that she'd be too exhausted afterward to do anything but go home and sleep. I was disappointed, but I told her I understood that work comes first, and that I hoped it wouldn't be too stressful for her. I spent that Saturday alone in my apartment, working on a gig I got from a freelance website. Around 11 that night, I was scrolling through Instagram mindlessly before bed when one of my friend's posts popped up. From the video, I could spot Ruby in frame for a second. She was at a club downtown. I could see the lights, hear the music, see her and her friends dressed up and dancing, clearly having a great time. She definitely was not at work. She definitely was not exhausted at home. She had straight up lied to me. I just stared at my phone, feeling a mix of hurt and anger. Why would she lie? If she wanted to go out with her friends instead of seeing me, she could have just said that. I might have been disappointed, but I would have understood. But she chose to lie instead, to make up this story about working late, and that felt so much worse than if she'd just been honest. I barely slept that night, trying to decide how to handle it. The next day, I called her in the afternoon and asked if we could talk. When she said yes, I asked her directly why she'd lied to me about working when she'd actually gone out. I wasn't yelling or accusing. I just wanted to understand what was going on. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She didn't apologize, show remorse, or admit that lying to me was wrong. Instead, she immediately became defensive and turned the situation around on me. She accused me of being controlling, saying things like, "So now you're stalking me, and I can't even go out without you tracking me?" I tried to explain that I wasn't stalking her, and that this wasn't about her going out. It was about her lying to me. But she wouldn't listen. She said I was possessive, that I wasn't giving her space to have her own life, and that she felt suffocated. I was utterly stunned. I wasn't trying to control or suffocate her. I just wanted to understand why the woman I loved was suddenly treating me like an inconvenience, as if spending time with me was some burden she wished to avoid. After that, whenever I tried to confront what was happening between us, she'd either shut down entirely and refuse to talk, or she'd lash out and start an argument. The fights became more frequent and more painful as the weeks went by. We hadn't argued much before all this, but now we couldn't have a conversation without it turning into a fight. And the things she said during those fights cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. She started comparing me to other men, which felt like a knife to the chest every single time. Every comparison was meant to make me feel less than and not good enough. She knew I was struggling. She knew I was working myself to exhaustion, juggling multiple jobs, sending out applications every day, doing everything humanly possible to get back on track. Yet she threw my financial situation in my face like it made me worthless as a person and as a partner. The woman I had done everything for, the woman I loved unconditionally and treated like a queen when I had the means, was now treating me like I was nothing because I hit a rough patch that wasn't even my fault. I couldn't believe this was the same person who used to tell me that money didn't matter, that she loved me for who I was, not for what I could buy her or where I could take her. Those words she'd said so many times before now felt like complete lies, because her actions showed me that money mattered to her. It mattered more than loyalty, more than our shared history, more than the love I thought we shared. And that realization was breaking my heart piece by piece. The day I found out Ruby was cheating on me shattered me, taking whatever hope I had left and crushing it into dust. I found out almost by complete accident, which somehow made it worse because it meant she'd been hiding it so well that I might never have known if circumstances had been different. Here's what happened. I got a call from a mutual friend of ours I've known for years. This close friend of mine isn't the type to get involved in drama or spread gossip, which is why, when he called me that Tuesday evening, his tone sounded like he was dreading what he had to say. He started with, "Man, I don't know how to tell you this." And I went back and forth about whether I should say anything at all, but if I were in your position, I'd want to know. I already knew it wasn't going to be good news. He told me that the previous Saturday night, he had been at an upscale downtown restaurant with some coworkers for a birthday dinner. While he was there, he saw Ruby walk in with another guy. At first, he thought maybe it was just a friend or a cousin or something innocent like that, so he didn't think much of it. But then he watched them for a bit, and the way they acted together left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. They were holding hands across the table. The guy had his hand on her lower back as they walked to their seats. They leaned in close, laughing, and at one point my friend said he saw them kiss. That made it crystal clear this wasn't a family member or a platonic friend. My friend said he felt sick watching it because he knew Ruby and I were still together, as far as he knew. He had actually seen me just a few days before that, and I had mentioned Ruby, so he knew we hadn't broken up. He debated telling me, because he didn't want to be the bearer of bad news, but ultimately he decided I deserved to know the truth rather than be kept in the dark. When he finished telling me all this, I just sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever. My brain was trying to process what I'd just heard, looking for an alternative explanation that would make it inaccurate. But there wasn't one. Everything suddenly made perfect sense in the worst possible way. All the canceled weekend plans, all the delayed text responses, all the excuses about being busy or tired or needing space, all the defensiveness when I asked simple questions about her day, all the sudden coldness and disrespect. It all clicked into place. Ruby had found someone else, someone who presumably had money, stability, and all the things I couldn't provide at that moment because I was struggling to get back on my feet. She thought she had found an upgrade, and instead of being honest with me about it, instead of breaking up with me like an adult, she just started cheating and treating me like garbage, probably hoping I'd get fed up and end things myself so she wouldn't have to be the bad guy. I thank my friend for telling me, even though hearing it felt like being punched in the chest repeatedly. He asked if I was okay, and I lied, saying I would be even though I felt like my entire world was collapsing around me. I left that cafe and drove straight to Ruby's apartment because I needed to hear it from her directly. I wanted to look her in the eye and ask if what my friend told me was true. Throughout the drive, I was lost in thought. I kept rehearsing in my head what I was going to say and how I would approach it, but every imagined version of the conversation ended badly. When I arrived at her place, I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to calm down so I wouldn't go in overly emotional. I finally got out, walked up to her door, and knocked. When she opened it, she looked surprised to see me, which made sense because I hadn't texted or called to warn her I was coming over. She asked what I was doing there, and I could hear an edge in her voice, as if I were inconveniencing her by showing up unannounced at my own girlfriend's apartment. I walked inside without waiting for an invitation and turned to face her. My voice trembled as I asked, "Are you seeing someone else?" I watched her face closely, searching for any sign of genuine confusion or shock that would suggest this was all a misunderstanding. But instead, I saw her trying to figure out how much I knew and whether she could still lie her way out of it. She asked me why I was asking that, what made me think so, and who I had been talking to. She was deflecting, turning it back on me instead of answering directly, which told me everything I needed to know before she said another word. I told her that someone had seen her with another guy, being affectionate, kissing, and that I needed her to be honest with me about what was really going on. I half expected her to deny it, come up with some elaborate explanation, or say it was all a misunderstanding, and that whoever had seen them had misinterpreted what they had seen. But she didn't deny it. After what felt like the longest silence of my life, Ruby just said, "Yes, I've been seeing someone else." That was it. Those 6 words destroyed 3 years of my life in a single sentence. I stood there staring at her, waiting for her to say something else, to show some kind of emotion, to at least pretend she felt bad about what she'd done. But she just stared back at me with that same cold expression, like she was waiting for me to leave so she could get back to whatever she'd been doing before I interrupted her evening. I managed to ask her why, even though my voice was barely above a whisper at that point. I asked her how long it had been going on, whether anything we'd shared meant anything to her, whether she had ever really loved me, or if I'd just been a convenience until something better came along. I needed answers, needed to understand how the woman who told me she loved me just a few months ago could do something like this. Ruby sighed, as if I was making a big deal out of nothing, then said, "I needed someone who could provide the lifestyle I wanted. I can't just sit around waiting for you to get your life together. I deserve to be happy." Every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. This was the woman I loved with everything I had and treated like a queen when I could. Now she was standing there telling me I wasn't good enough because I lost my job and was going through a rough patch. She was telling me that her happiness, her lifestyle, and material comfort mattered more than the 3 years we'd spent together. I realized in that moment that I didn't honestly know this person standing in front of me. The Ruby I thought I loved wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have been so cruel. Either that Ruby never existed, and I was in love with an illusion, or she changed into someone completely different, and either way, the outcome was the same. The relationship was over, and it had been for a while. I'd just been too blind or too hopeful to see it. I left Ruby's apartment that night feeling as if I were moving through a fog. The drive home blurred past me. I don't even clearly remember getting from her place back to mine, which is probably dangerous since I definitely shouldn't have been driving in that condition, but somehow I managed to make it. When I got inside my apartment, I just collapsed onto my couch and sat in the dark for hours. The heartbreak I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, and I'm not exaggerating. I'd gone through breakups before Ruby, but this was different. This wasn't just sadness over a relationship ending. It was betrayal, humiliation, and the destruction of everything I thought I knew about someone I loved. That realization hurt almost as much as the cheating itself, because it meant that everything I believed we had was built on a foundation that was never as solid as I thought. In the days that followed, the pain I experienced was overwhelming and affected every aspect of my life. I couldn't eat because my stomach was constantly in knots, and food made me feel sick. I lost about 15 pounds within the first month after finding out, not because I was trying to lose weight, but because I literally couldn't force myself to eat more than a few bites of anything before feeling nauseous. I couldn't sleep either, or when I did, I'd wake up a few hours later with heartache. I couldn't focus on anything productive. I was still job hunting, still trying to get my career back on track, but now I was doing it while emotionally devastated, which made everything 10 times harder. My mind kept drifting back to Ruby, to what she'd done, to how much it hurt. Every single memory I had of our relationship was now stained, poisoned by the knowledge of how it had ended. I also couldn't stop wondering what I could have done differently, even though I knew logically that losing my job wasn't something I could have prevented. Ruby's decision to cheat was entirely on her and had nothing to do with me not being good enough. But in those first few months after the breakup, I was overwhelmed with self-doubt and insecurity. The betrayal had shaken my confidence in ways that went far beyond romantic relationships. If someone I loved and trusted completely could turn on me like that, how could I trust my judgment about anything or anyone? I went through all the classic stages of grief. There was denial, where part of me kept thinking this couldn't really be happening, that Ruby would realize she'd made a mistake and come back apologizing. There was anger, where I'd be furious at her for what she'd done, angry at myself for not seeing it coming, and enraged at the universe for putting me in this situation in the first place. There was bargaining, where I'd think about what I could say or do to win her back, even though I knew deep down that I shouldn't want her back after what she'd done. There was depression, which was probably the stage I spent the most time in, where everything felt hopeless and pointless, and I couldn't see how I was ever going to feel normal again. I wanted to hate Ruby, and part of me absolutely did hate her for what she'd done to me. But another part of me still loved her, or at least loved the version of her I thought I'd known, and that made everything so much more complicated and painful. You can't just turn off love like a light switch, even when the person doesn't deserve your love anymore. What made everything worse was that I couldn't escape reminders of Ruby and what she'd done. We had mutual friends, so I'd hear things about how she was doing, whether I wanted to or not. People would mention seeing her out somewhere, or they'd accidentally bring her up in conversation and then get awkward when they remembered we'd broken up. I heard through these mutual friends that Ruby was now officially with this new guy, the one she cheated on me with. I'd made the mistake of looking at her Instagram before I blocked her, and seeing those photos felt like being stabbed repeatedly. The guy she'd left me for was older than both of us, probably in his early 40s, while Ruby and I were both in our late 20s. From what I could see and what I'd heard, he owned a consulting business and was clearly doing well financially. He was everything I wasn't at that moment. That feeling of inadequacy was almost as painful as the betrayal itself because it attacked my sense of self-worth at a fundamental level. I felt like I was drowning. Every day was a struggle just to get through and to function at a basic level. Some days, I didn't want to get out of bed at all. Other days, I'd call in sick to my part-time jobs because I just couldn't face the world. I knew I was falling apart and needed to pull myself together, but knowing that and actually doing it are two completely different things. This was, without question, the lowest point of my life, and I couldn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. I felt completely and utterly broken, and I genuinely didn't know if I was ever going to feel whole again. But I made a decision that likely saved my life by choosing to pick myself up and move forward, despite the pain. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was easy, because that would be a total lie. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. There were mornings when I'd wake up and the first thought in my mind was Ruby, and I'd feel this crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to even get out of bed. There were days when I'd see something that reminded me of her, and I'd feel this overwhelming urge to call her, to text her, to beg her to come back and give us another chance. Part of me wanted to promise her that I'd be better, that I'd work harder, that I'd get back to where I was financially, and we could go back to how things used to be. But I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I didn't reach out at all. Instead, I deliberately chose to block her on everything I could think of. I blocked her number so she couldn't call or message me. I blocked her on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the social platforms we use to connect on. I even blocked her email address so her messages would go straight to spam without me ever seeing them. I know that might seem extreme to some, but I did it because I knew myself well enough to realize that if I left any door open, even slightly, I would be tempted to go through it. I knew that if I saw her posting pictures on Instagram looking happy with her new guy, or tweeting about her life, or getting a random text from her at 2 in the morning, it would set me back in my healing process. I needed a complete break, a total separation, because that was the only way I could move forward. Then I threw myself into rebuilding my life, and I want to be clear that I wasn't doing it for her or to prove anything to her. I was doing it for myself, for my own sanity and survival. I kept grinding every single day, even when I didn't feel like it, even when it felt pointless. I kept applying for jobs, sending my resume to every company with an opening, even if it was only remotely related to my field. I kept working on whatever freelance gigs and part-time jobs I could find, even those that paid barely anything, because I needed to keep moving forward and pay my bills. I wasn't going to let this situation destroy me financially on top of everything else. But I also knew I needed help processing what had happened emotionally, because I was carrying around so much pain, anger, and confusion that I couldn't sort through it all on my own. So I started going to therapy, which was something I'd never done before, and honestly, something I was a little skeptical about at first. But it turned out to be one of the best decisions I made during that entire period. My therapist helped me work through the betrayal and process the feelings of inadequacy that the whole situation had triggered. I also began reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the relationship, which I think many people do when they're in a serious relationship without realizing it. I had let some friendships fade because I was so focused on Ruby and making her happy that I didn't make time for others in my life. But after the breakup, I reached out to those friends, and honestly, they were fantastic. They let me vent when I needed to, distracted me when I needed a break, and reminded me that I had value and was a good person even when I didn't feel like one. I needed an outlet for all the emotions I was experiencing, and physical exercise helped. I started reading more books about personal growth, psychology, and philosophy, trying to understand myself better and figure out what I wanted from life moving forward. I focused on becoming a better version of myself, not for anyone else, but because I deserved to invest in myself the way I had invested in Ruby. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again. The process took months. It was more like I'd have a good day when I didn't think about her much, and then the next day would be terrible, bringing me right back to the pain. But over time, the good days began to outnumber the bad days. It took about 3 or 4 months before I could go a whole day without thinking about Ruby, and even longer, maybe 6 or 7 months, before those thoughts didn't immediately trigger waves of hurt and anger. But gradually, little by little, the pain lessened. I began to see the situation more clearly. She was the one who bailed when things got tough. She was the one whose love turned out to be conditional and shallow. None of that was on me. I also began to realize that I had actually avoided a bullet, as messed up as that sounds, given how much pain I was in. If Ruby could abandon me so easily during tough times, then she would have done it again at some point in the future. It could have been after we got married, or after we had children, or during some other crisis that life inevitably throws at you. It's better to find out who she truly was now, when we weren't legally tied or raising kids together, than to discover it years later when the stakes were even higher and the damage even worse. About 8 months after the breakup, I finally got a decent job. It wasn't as high level as my previous position at the marketing firm, and it paid a little less, but it was stable, relevant to my field, and had real growth potential. The pay was enough to cover my bills with some extra left over, so I could start saving again and stop living paycheck to paycheck. It meant I could breathe easier and stop stressing every day about whether I'd be able to make rent or pay my utilities. This felt like a victory in itself. 2 years went by as I rebuilt my life from scratch, healed from what Ruby had done to me, and moved forward. During that time, I dated a little here and there, nothing serious or long-term, just casual dates with women I met through friends or dating apps. I wasn't actively searching for a serious relationship. Still, I was open to love again, though I was much more cautious about whom I let into my life and how quickly I let them in. I learned to pay attention to how people treated me when things weren't perfect, not just when everything was going well. I realized that words are easy, but actions are what truly matter. Then one morning, completely out of nowhere, I woke up to a message notification on my phone. I grabbed my phone off my nightstand, still half asleep and squinting at the screen, and saw her name, Ruby. My heart immediately jumped in my chest, not from excitement or happiness, but from pure shock. I hadn't heard from Ruby in 2 full years. I hadn't seen her name pop up on my phone, received a message, a call, or any kind of communication from her since I blocked her right after the breakup. But this notification was from Instagram, and it was from an account I didn't recognize, some username I'd never seen before. It took me a second to process it, but then I realized what had happened. She had created a brand new Instagram account, a completely new profile, specifically to get around the fact that I'd blocked her original account. She'd gone through the effort of setting up a whole new account so that she could reach me. I opened the message and read it. The message itself was oddly casual, considering our history and the fact that we hadn't spoken in 2 years. She was trying to be friendly, asking how I was doing, saying she'd been thinking about me lately, and hoping I was doing well. It was the kind of message you'd send to an old acquaintance you ran into on social media, someone you used to know but hadn't talked to in a while, not someone whose heart you'd completely shattered. There was no acknowledgement of what had happened between us, no mention of how things had ended, no apology or explanation for why she was reaching out after 2 years of silence. Just this breezy, casual message, acting like we were old friends catching up. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a complex mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was surprise, of course, because I genuinely never expected to hear from her again. There was confusion because I couldn't understand what would make her reach out now after all this time. There was anger because the message's casual tone felt disrespectful, given everything that had happened. And underneath all that was a tiny part of me that remembered what it felt like to love her, that remembered the good times we'd shared before everything fell apart. But that small spark of old feelings wasn't enough because I realized I had nothing to say to her. I didn't want to start a conversation. I didn't want to catch up. I didn't care to know how she had been or what she had been doing. I wasn't going to open that door even slightly because I knew where it would lead, and I worked too hard to get where I was to risk going backward. So I didn't reply or ask why she was reaching out. I simply went to her new profile, clicked the 3 dots in the corner, and blocked the account. Then I tried to forget about it and focus on my day. But Ruby didn't stop there. And that's when I started to realize this wasn't just a casual attempt to reconnect. The very next day, after I'd blocked her new Instagram account, my phone started ringing. I looked at the screen and saw it was an unknown number, a number I didn't have saved in my contacts. I almost didn't answer because I get spam calls all the time, and I usually just let them go to voicemail. But I was expecting a call from someone at work about a project we were working on, so I thought they were calling from a different number and picked up. I answered with a simple hello, and there was this pause on the other end, just a second or two of silence, and then I heard her voice. "Hey, it's me, Ruby. Please don't hang up." The sound of her voice after 2 years brought back a flood of memories and emotions that I thought I'd fully processed and moved past. I could hear the nervousness in her voice, which told me she knew this was a risk and wasn't sure how I'd react. But I didn't give her a chance to say anything else. I hung up immediately. Then I went into my phone settings and blocked that number, adding it to my blocked list, so she couldn't call me from it again. I thought that would be the end of it, that she'd realize I wasn't interested in talking to her and leave me alone. But I was wrong. Then the messages started pouring in, not just 1 or 2, but a whole flood. Ruby must have gotten my email address somehow. Maybe she always had it from when we were together, or she found it through a mutual friend, or came across it online, because my inbox began filling up with long, detailed emails from her. They kept arriving over the next few days, sometimes multiple messages a day, each one longer than the last. At first, I was going to delete them all without reading, hovering my cursor over the delete button, ready just to trash them and move on. since I didn't owe her my time or attention. I'd made it clear by blocking her and hanging up that I didn't want contact. But curiosity got the best of me. I needed to know what could make her reach out after 2 years of complete silence, especially after how things had ended between us, after she chose another man over me and walked away without looking back. So I opened the first email and started reading, and what I found was shocking, even though it really shouldn't have been. Ruby apologized in long, detailed, heartfelt terms for how things had ended between us. She repeatedly expressed in different ways that choosing the other man over me was the worst mistake she had ever made in her life. She said she had regretted it almost from the beginning, but was too proud and ashamed to admit it. She explained, in painful and specific detail, that her relationship with this other guy had been an absolute nightmare from start to finish. According to her emails, he had been controlling from the very beginning, but she either hadn't seen it or hadn't wanted to see it because she was blinded by the lifestyle he provided. She said he had money and success, and that he could take her to expensive restaurants and buy her nice things. However, she also said the financial comfort came with a price she hadn't expected. He began isolating her from her friends, telling her they were bad influences or that they didn't really care about her. He monitored her phone, demanding to know whom she was texting and calling, and went through her messages when she wasn't looking. He constantly accused her of cheating, which she found ironic and hypocritical, considering he was the one she had cheated on me with. He used his money to control her, holding it over her head and making her feel like she owed him because he paid for things. This made her feel trapped and dependent on him. Some of Ruby's emails were even darker and more disturbing. She wrote that the guy had become abusive, not just emotionally, but physically as well. She described specific incidents, such as times when he'd grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises, moments when he'd shoved her or thrown things during arguments, and occasions when he'd screamed in her face and called her horrible names. She detailed things I would never, ever have done to her, things that no person should ever do to another, regardless of the circumstances. She mentioned nights when she was genuinely scared of him, when she'd lock herself in the bathroom and cry, wishing she could leave, but feeling like she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, because she'd burned bridges with her friends and family through her actions. Reading these descriptions was difficult because, even though Ruby had hurt me deeply and betrayed me terribly, I didn't want to believe she had been abused. Nobody deserves that, no matter what they've done. She continued in her messages, depicting a relationship that had been toxic and unhealthy from the start, but that she had stayed in for all the wrong reasons. She said she had stayed partly out of pride because she didn't want to admit that she had made a mistake leaving me. She said she had stayed partly out of fear because he had made her feel like she couldn't survive without him and his financial support. And she had stayed partly out of this misguided belief that things would improve, that he would change, that the good times they sometimes shared were worth enduring the bad. She said she had thought about reaching out to me so many times over the past year. According to her, there were nights when she typed messages to me and then deleted them before sending, too ashamed and embarrassed to admit she had made such a catastrophic mistake. She wrote about how she constantly compared him to me in her mind, remembering how I treated her with respect, kindness, and genuine love. She said she had taken all of that for granted when we were together, that she hadn't appreciated what she had until it was gone, and that she only truly understood what she had lost after she threw it away. Ruby wrote in her emails that she finally realized what we had was real, that I loved her for who she was as a person, not for what she could do for me or how she made me look. She admitted at last that she had been shallow, materialistic, and cruel to me during my lowest point. She confessed that she had abandoned me when I needed support, disrespected me, lied, and cheated, and she acknowledged that none of that was okay or justified. She said she had spent the past months paying for that mistake, living in a relationship that made her miserable, and that she now understood she had gotten exactly what she deserved. She told me she finally left him a few months ago, found the courage to walk away, and had been staying with a friend while she got back on her feet. She mentioned she had been going to therapy and working on herself, trying to understand why she made the choices she did and how to become a better person. But then her emails changed from apologies and explanations to what she truly wanted, me. She pleaded for another chance, asking to prove she had changed and learned from her mistakes. She said she still loved me, that her feelings hadn't faded even when she was with him, and that deep down she believed we were meant to be together. She acknowledged that I might be angry and hurt, admitting she didn't deserve my forgiveness, but she still asked for it because she believed we could be good again if I just let her back in. She repeatedly promised she was different now, that she understood what truly matters in life and relationships, and that she would never take me for granted or treat me the way she had before. She said she'd be grateful every day if I gave her another shot, promising to spend the rest of her life making things right and proving she was worthy of my love and trust. The messages kept coming over several days, each one more desperate and emotional than the last, trying different approaches to get me to respond. Some were apologetic and remorseful. Some were nostalgic, reminding me of the good times we'd shared. Some almost begged, pleading with me to talk to her and hear her out. I read every single message she sent all the way through, even though part of me knew I probably shouldn't. And I'd be lying if I said that part of me wasn't tempted by what she was saying. There was a time, not that long ago really, when I would have done absolutely anything to hear Ruby say these things. There was a time when I would have given anything to have her acknowledge what she'd done, to hear her express genuine remorse and take responsibility for how she treated me. There was a time when I would have taken her back in a heartbeat, no questions asked, just grateful and relieved to have her back in my life and not to be alone anymore. If she had reached out 6 months after the breakup or even a year after, I honestly don't know if I would have had the strength to say no. I might have convinced myself that people make mistakes and deserve second chances, that love means forgiveness, that we could work through what had happened and come out stronger on the other side. But that time had passed. 2 years had gone by, to be exact, and I wasn't the same person I had been when Ruby left me. As I read her words, I didn't feel the love I once felt for her. I didn't feel that pull, that magnetic attraction, that sense that she was the one person in the world I was meant to be with. Instead, I felt sadness for what she'd been through because, genuinely, no one deserves to be abused regardless of their past actions or mistakes. But alongside that sadness, it was crystal clear that Ruby wasn't reaching out to me because she'd had some profound realization about my worth as a person or because she'd suddenly understood how good I'd been to her. She was reaching out because her other option, the man she'd left me for, had failed spectacularly. Her plan hadn't worked out the way she'd hoped. The grass she thought was greener on the other side turned out to be dead, brown, and full of thorns. And now she was looking back at what she'd left behind, seeking safety, comfort, and security, searching for someone she knew would treat her well, because I had proven I would. I was her backup plan, her safety net, her second choice, the guy she knew would take care of her now that her first choice had become a disaster. But I wasn't interested in being anyone's second choice or part of someone's redemption story. I didn't want to be the nice guy she came back to after the exciting guy proved to be terrible. The truth was, and I knew this deep down, there was no way I could go back to Ruby after how she treated me. It wasn't about revenge or wanting to make her suffer or pay for what she'd done. It was about self-respect and self-preservation. Yes, people can change. I believe that. But people can also fall back into old habits when circumstances change, especially when they're under stress or facing difficulties. What would happen if I took Ruby back, only to face another hardship a year or two later? What if I lost my job again, got sick, or encountered some other crisis that impacted my ability to provide the lifestyle she wanted? Would she stay this time, or would she find another escape route, another man who seemed like a better option? Beyond all of that, the simple truth was that I had moved on with my life. My life wasn't perfect, and I wasn't where I had been financially before I lost that first job all those years ago, but I was stable and content. I had rebuilt my self-esteem and my life from the ground up, piece by piece. I did it on my own, through my effort, determination, and resilience. Taking Ruby back would mean reopening wounds that had finally healed after 2 years of work. It would mean inviting chaos, drama, and uncertainty back into the calm, stable life I had worked so hard to build. It would mean constantly wondering if she had really changed or was just settling for me until something better came along. It would mean never fully trusting her again contaminating anything we tried to rebuild together. I deserved better than that. I deserved someone who would stand by me during hard times and difficult circumstances, not someone who would abandon me the moment things got tough. Ruby wasn't that person, so I didn't respond to her messages. I let them sit there in my inbox, marked as read, but completely unanswered, because I genuinely had nothing to say to her. No amount of apologies could undo what she'd done to me. No promises about the future could guarantee that she wouldn't do the same thing again if circumstances changed. Ruby made several more attempts over the following weeks to contact me through different channels, and each time it became clearer that she wasn't getting through. She sent messages through mutual friends we still knew, people we both knew from our time together, asking them to tell me that she needed to talk to me, that it was important, and that she just wanted a chance to explain. I politely told these friends that I appreciated them thinking of me, but that I wasn't interested in reconnecting with Ruby, and that I would prefer they didn't pass along any more messages from her. Most of them understood and respected my decision, though a few tried to persuade me to at least hear her out, saying she seemed genuinely sorry, and that everyone deserves a second chance. I didn't argue or try to explain the whole situation. I just firmly repeated that I had made my decision and wasn't going to change my mind. Then one Saturday morning, Ruby took it even further. I planned to go to this coffee shop near my apartment, a place I used to go to regularly on weekend mornings for a good cup of coffee and to read or work on my laptop for a bit. As I was walking up to the entrance, I happened to glance through the window and saw Ruby sitting at a table inside, positioned so she'd have a clear view of the door, waiting and watching for me to arrive. It was apparent this wasn't a coincidence. She knows that I frequent this place, and she'd come here hoping to accidentally run into me, to force a face-to-face conversation that I'd made clear I didn't want to have. The moment I saw her, I turned around and walked in the opposite direction, going to a different coffee shop several blocks away instead. I felt this mix of anger and disbelief that she would go to such lengths, that she would essentially stake out a place I was known to go just to ambush me into talking to her. Each attempt Ruby made to contact me only reinforced in my mind that I'd made the right decision. If she had truly changed and grown as she claimed in her messages, she would have accepted my silence as an answer. She would have respected my boundaries and my clear desire not to have contact with her. It showed me that she was still thinking primarily about herself, her own needs, and her desire to alleviate her guilt. A person who genuinely changed would have sent one message apologizing and then backed off when they didn't get a response. They would have respected the other person's right to move on and not want them in their life anymore. But Ruby kept pushing and pushing, trying every avenue she could think of, and that told me everything I needed to know about whether she'd really changed. Eventually, after a few weeks of this, the attempt stopped. I don't know exactly why or what changed. Maybe she finally accepted that I wasn't going to respond no matter what she did. Perhaps she moved on to someone else and focused her attention there. Maybe she just got tired of trying and gave up. Honestly, I didn't know, and I didn't care. I didn't spend time wondering about it or trying to figure out what she was thinking or doing. Looking back now, from where I am today, losing Ruby was one of the best things that ever happened to me, even though it absolutely didn't feel that way at the time. Anyone can be a good partner when things are easy and comfortable and fun. The real test is what they do when things get hard. There's this saying I heard somewhere: the grass isn't greener on the other side, it's greener where you water it. Ruby learned that lesson the hard way. She thought she'd found something better when she met that other guy, something that would make her happier and give her the life she wanted. But she discovered that relationships built on superficial foundations, like money and status, crumble quickly when real life happens. Meanwhile, I had watered my own grass, so to speak. I'd invested time and energy in myself, in my own healing and growth, and in building a life I was genuinely proud of. And I wasn't about to let someone who had trampled all over my grass before, like it was worthless, come back and mess it up again just because her grass had died. That's my story. The woman who thought the grass was greener on the other side learned she was wrong. By the time she figured that out and came back looking for what she'd left behind, I had moved on to my own greener pastures. I don't wish Ruby harm or hope bad things happen to her. I hope she gets the help she needs, keeps up with her therapy, learns from her mistakes, and eventually finds happiness. But that happiness won't be with me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a good life for yourself and refusing to let people who hurt you back in. It's choosing yourself and your own peace over someone else's guilt or regret. That's precisely what I did, and I've never regretted it for a second. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it resonates with some of you out there, and if you're going through something similar right now, I hope it gives you the strength to choose yourself, even when it's hard and even when part of you wants to go back to what's familiar. You deserve better than someone who only wants you when their other options fail. Remember that.